Good morning, everybody, and welcome. It's probably nearly the afternoon in the exotic outposts of Asia. These lovely people get to live in the lovely part of the world. We have the last session of our Asian tour, and no better place to end up on than the most important place, of course, which is LNG, which is gas, the engine of all things possible in Asia. And we have three great voices from across the territory. We have Yuri Humber, founder and president of Japan NRG platform in Japan. We have Marc, Howson, head of APAC and global LNG at Welligence Analytics in Singapore, and Ashore, analyst for natural gas markets at Mysteel OilChem in China itself. Let's kick off this morning with Marc. Marc, we saw the Asian LNG demand decline by about 5% in 2025. What's Welligence Analytics outlook for Asian LNG demand in 2026?
Yeah, you're right, Sean. Asian demand was quite weak last year, very much driven by weakness in the Chinese imports, as the country very much increased their domestic production from the Sichuan basin of gas, but also their piped imports, both from Russia but also Myanmar. However, when we look into 2026, we just see this very large wave of LNG supply globally. And that is mainly from the United States, but also from Qatar as well, ramping up. And that is why we do expect European demand to be relatively flat for LNG in 2026, but then a big recovery in the Asian LNG demand, particularly from the more price-sensitive buyers in the Indian subcontinent region. Average spot LNG prices last year were about $12. We expect them to be between $9 and $10 in 2026 overall. So those more price-sensitive demand drivers will come and increase Asian imports again in 2026.
So you see a rise in Asian demand in 26, 5% down in 25.
Correct.
Did you give a percentage there? In 20?
It'll be between 5 and 10% increase.
Increase from 2025. Let's go to China, which of course is the critical center of Asian LNG demand, Ashore with Mysteel OilChem. We saw the average for the Asian region for LNG, of course, massive buyers in Japan and Korea, but across the region down 5%, but in China it was down 15%. LNG imports. What's your outlook at Mysteel OilChem for 2026, Ashore?
I think in 2026, China's demand will continue to decrease. And because in 2025, it's out of our expectation. Because of the slump of Chinese property, so in 2026, it will continue this trend, I believe. But about the LNG imported volume, maybe it will be increased because we have signed more long-term contracts in 2026. But meanwhile, Chinese natural gas domestic production had also increased significantly in recent years. So it's quite apparent the trend will be decreased. And the price is also like the last gentleman said will be decreased about $9 to $10.
So just to be clear, Ashore, Chinese LNG demand LNG imports, which were down 15% in 2025, you expect them to be down again or to recover?
It will be recovered. Its long-term contracts, because we have signed long-term contracts with Qatar, and in the next year, in 2026, it will increase 15 million tons in China. But Chinese demand don't recover in 26, I believe.
So I excuse my just want to get the crystal clear on this. Chinese LNG imports, Mark said there, Welligence's house view is 5 to 10% increase for Chinese LNG imports. OilChem agrees with that similar increase of LNG imports, 5 to 10%, due to the long-term contract commitments that China has made. So this, to be clear, that's what you are saying, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great.
Yes.
But yeah, that's save butts for the next time. Yuri
Okay.
Humber, of course, in Japan, the anchor, the original LNG market, the first to ever take a Qatar tanker many moons ago. I was even around for that, and nonetheless, it's. Obviously, China, the big coney, but Japan still very critical. And critical alignment with Japan's LNG is the health of the Japanese economy. Let's start, Yuri, with the same question for you. Asian LNG demand was down 5% in 2025. What is your views for Asian LNG demand in 2026?
Thanks very much, Sean. Well, certainly, I think I best speak on Japan, which is probably, somewhere close by with China as the top buyer. But I will say that although maybe Asia-wide, there's going to be an uptake in LNG, but it certainly isn't going to be held by Japan. Japan, and I'll come straight down to it, I think Japan's LNG import volumes are going to drop quite significantly this year. We're probably going to see a drop of 5 to 7%. It is last year, imports actually went, well, we don't have the final figures as yet, but they probably will end up somewhere around 64 million tons, which is actually sort of the lowest number, could be the lowest number since 2009. And if we drop down to the 60 million ton level, which I think there's every chance that we will, then we're really down to 2006, 2005 numbers for Japan. So it is really quite a big drop. I think there's quite a few economic and geopolitical factors behind this. So if you'll allow me just to kind of run through a couple of them. So first of all, there is a small contribution or bigger contribution from nuclear expected. As you probably know, one of the reactors at what was built as once the world's largest nuclear power plant, Kashiwazaki Kariwa, is due to start sort of be switched on towards the end of this month, and it will be sort of fully at commercial production levels by the end of February.
Can I just, Yuri, interject there just to get some context? Obviously, before the Fukushima disaster, nuclear power made up a significant percentage of power supply for Japan. You might give us what that was as a percentage, what it fell to after the closures, and now what it's as a percentage of total electricity supply in Japan, what it's coming back to. So you might just give us some historical context and on a percentage basis of the total power supply into Japan.
Sure. So essentially, we're talking about a third of Japan's electricity coming from nuclear power before the 2011 disaster. Almost immediately afterwards, a number of reactors were shut down. Now, in fact, some operated until they were shut down for scheduled maintenance, several months or a year later. And then Japan was in a zero nuclear reactor status for about maybe, let's say, a year and a half, 2 years, until we saw some restarts again at the end of 2014. However, those restarts have been very, very slow, apart from a few reactors in the opposite side of the country from the Fukushima area. We really were at 2020, we had just 4 nuclear reactors out of 33 potentially operable reactors in Japan actually working. So we have now crept up to about 14 reactors. As I said, we should have 15 once this restart is completed.
So as we start 2026, what percentage of total electricity supply is from nuclear before this next plant opens?
I think around 9 to 10%. of electricity could be coming from nuclear, depending on weather shutdowns and so on. But what the government targets in their sort of mid to long term energy strategy is 20%. Now, whether that is actually realistic given the state of the nuclear industry is really a huge question mark. But certainly, we were down into the 3-4% of total electricity in the mid 2010s, should I say. And now we're sort of around or getting close to around the 10% mark.
And this new one that's opening at the end of this month, is it a big one? Is it a small one?
Yeah, it's a 1.35 gigawatt reactor, so it's very, very sizable. I think, as they said, it probably on an annual basis it'd be more than 1 million tons of LNG displaced, but since it's sort of won't be fully commercially operable until towards the end of February, then I think 1 million tons a year is a fair guess. But I mean, there are it's not just a nuclear story in Japan. And again, not to sort of take on too long, but I think there's quite a few other factors taking place. I mean, one, unfortunately, is the sort of the local regional tensions with China at the moment, which has just imposed sort of export restrictions towards Japan that is being hinted at that would also get into rare earth export restrictions. And since we've had those in the past, it is, there are examples. One of the Japanese automakers, Suzuki, had to basically idle its several manufacturing lines for a couple of weeks because of restrictions of rare earth metals, which are used, of course, as you know, in lots of elements, including batteries and various other components in electronics and manufacturing. So if these sort of geopolitical tensions go through, they will certainly have shocks on the economy. And I guess the other major thing to mention is that inflation is very, very high. Is the more than 30-year high in Japan at this moment, which means, like in many
And what
other countries,
percentage?
So, well, I think we're still talking, numbers that probably would make people laugh, at least in Europe, sort of I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but say like around 3% mark. But for
so
food,
high for Japan, but not necessarily.
But for food, the numbers are extremely high. If on a year-on-year basis, certain staples like rice are up 40-50%. So that is an incredibly sensitive area and very noticeable. On food produce, you really are talking in the teens and sometimes the 20s, and energy, of course, because Japan imports so much energy. So what that means for LNG specifically is that I think, and this has been sort of semi-signaled by the government via various aligned think tanks, is that probably this year Japan's going to dial back a little bit of LNG and introduce more coal. It's very likely that coal will again become the number one energy fuel in Japan this year, because also, amongst other things, although LNG prices have dropped, and as Marc and Ashore mentioned, are probably going to drop further this year, but coal prices are down 25% year on year.
Well, let's bring Marc back in on that. Marc, just speaking to the geopolitics of this and sort of broaden out the lens a bit globally, China stopped importing LNG from US early last year, a big factor in its decrease in imports. As you sort of obviously also carry a global vision and role within Welligence, what's the global narrative here from a geopolitical point of view, and how that might interfere with some of the LNG movements across the world? Obviously, after Venezuela, it seems like all bets are off. But
well, what we've observed, Sean, is as Ashore said, certainly more LNG coming into China, particularly from the contracted positions in Qatar, and as I mentioned before, also more gas coming in from Myanmar and Russia as well on the pipeline side, which really does free up that US LNG to predominantly keep flowing into Europe, because we don't expect a big resumption in piped gas flows back to Europe anytime soon. And the other, obviously, big supplier into Canada from an LNG perspective is Australia, in the Asia Pacific region. And the good news with Australia is there are actually a couple of new plants that should start up over the course of 2026 and increased supply, including some volumes into China, and that includes just expansions at the Pluto LNG facility, but also the rejuvenation of the Darwin LNG facility as well. So as you say, those US volumes really staying in the Atlantic basin, particularly into Europe, and then China increasingly getting both pipe gas and LNG domestically, but also from non-US suppliers.
I mean, when you look at that, Marc, from the point of view of the geopolitics of things, where would you bring the outlook for the northern routes of? There's talk. We have another speaker on the platform today mentioning growing relations between China and Russia and the likelihood China supporting Russia's construction of nuclear-powered LNG tankers to get through the Northern Passage. Where do you see that bigger picture playing into some of these outlooks on the geopolitics of LNG?
You're right on the LNG side. Obviously, that is a way of Russia to increase their LNG exports. However, to build those new tankers can take several years. A lot of the conventional tankers are either built by the Koreans or the Japanese, and so they are subject to sanctions from the Western nations indirectly. As I say, the more obvious way on the gas side would be a continual ramping up in the power of Siberia. Pipe gas, kind of phase one between the two countries, and then potentially kind of doubling of that capacity through a phase two power of Siberia expansion to kind of bring the gas into the more mainland areas of China through the pipe, as opposed to the LNG for now.
Ashore, speaking to the outlook for price on LNG, as Marc mentioned at the top of his comments, pricing last year was 12 on or less, a little less on JKM for LNG. Expectation now for $2 or $3 below that. At those kind of numbers, that would seem a very attractive right across Asia, but particularly in China, price sensitive. Would that not drive a greater appetite for some spot buying in China?
Actually, it's quite hard for this price to driven its board purchase, because now the long-term contract volume has covered almost the imported volume. So it's quite hard for China to purchase more support resources. And if the support resources prices are lower and to our expectation, then maybe the three major oil company or other second tier company, they will purchase support resources to lower their cost of their resource pool. It's okay, but to long term, China will like to purchase the stability of their energy supply, so they will more inclined to sign a long-term contract. But now, its long-term contract has already covered its domestic demand, and also it also has increased China's domestic production.
And just speaking on that point, what is the outlook for China's domestic gas production this year? Can it grow more this year?
Yes, it will grow more because our China's domestic LNG picking techniques had always been increasing. And the Chinese domestic output is increased year on year. And also we have the
Can you give me a percentage? Give me a percentage. What is the total gas production in China last year? What can it increase this year?
7%. Of course, in the 2025, the LNG output for China for China domestic production is almost 31%. It's increased year on year and is higher 90% than the 2025, I think, in the 2026.
It can grow by 90%? No.
No, 70%, about 7%, sorry.
7%.
Sorry.
Domestic gas production in China in 2026, you think it can grow by 7 more percent?
Yes.
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 Okay. Yuri, speaking to that, I mean, coming back to the price, and actually, can we bring up the survey questions that we have for this session as we tackle this subject, Yuri? Again, we have 2 questions here. Total Asian LNG demand fell 5% in 25 to 240 million tons. What is the outlook for Asia's total LNG demand in 26? We discussed that earlier. Will it remain flat, fall again by up to 5%, rise by up to 5%, or rise by up to 10%? So which of these do we think it is? There seems to be a consensus is rise, although not in Japan. Need to answer both questions. The price, benchmark price, it was a little under $12 in 24, a little over $13 last year. Maybe I got that wrong. Did I? Marc said it was $12 last year. The outlook for next year, however, is the question. Near 11 or less, closer to 12, closer to 13, near 14 or more. It's clearly some views on that. So Yuri, speaking to that, Marc's view, generally the oversupply that's coming into the market should push prices down. Where does that look like for Japan? As you mentioned there, that the returning nuclear displacing up to 1 million tons of LNG, but LNG, it's under $10 at JKM. Is that not attractive to Japan?
I mean, it is,
Yeah.
but there are 2 things to note there. One is, as he said, $10 LNG may be more attractive there. Of course, it is more attractive than $11, $15 LNG as it has been in recent years. But if you have the option of coal and the coal prices are down even further, then at least for a short period of time. Again, I don't think this is a structural shift of Japan moving stronger into coal, but I think for a period of time, especially when the government is extremely focused on inflation, on the cost of living, let's say not crisis, but at least an urgency, that may be less of a tempting thing, because also Japan is a long-term contract nation, right? And that's something that the companies actually have started or have tried to move away from, because they too would like to be a lot more nimble, a lot more trader focused. They would like to take advantage of the lower prices and maybe sell that LNG into Southeast Asia, amongst other places. I mean, JERA's just signed a contract with India for that seasonal sort of demand swap. But overall, the government still is very, very keen for the Japanese companies to secure a very large percentage of their LNG under long-term contracts. And what we've seen, and maybe this brings into your next point, we've seen, let's say, over the last 12 months, is quite a lot of signing of contracts for long-term deals with primarily US projects. So yes, US projects are way more flexible in terms of their contract terms than, let's say, the Middle East and elsewhere, but they are still longer term contracts. And in that sense, there is only so much room. There will be spot market activity by the Japanese, but maybe not quite as much as you're indicating.
Marc, just speak to some of the project structure. I mean, at sub $10 on JKM, it should be attractive to some of the more sort of energy deficient countries, Bangladesh, Pakistan. Can we see the sort of, if Japan is down, that the future at these prices and the softer price expected to stick around a while, given the capacities coming out of Qatar and America? Is this a time for countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan and others to build the infrastructure needed to take in better quantities of LNG? What's the outlook for that intersection, lower price period? We've missed those moments in the past in countries like Bangladesh and others to build permanent onshore infrastructure. Could that happen now and coming this year, the coming years?
Yes, well, actually, the nice thing with some of the countries, Sean, including the ones you mentioned just now, Bangladesh and Pakistan, they are quite gas-based economies, and obviously they do have floating LNG import infrastructure in place, and they've obviously got the gas pipelines as well as the gas-fired power generation. They just need the additional supply. So, yes, we expect both South Asia, and that's very much pushed by Philippines and Vietnam that just began importing LNG in the last couple of years, and then Southeast Asia, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan to drive the market in Asia in 2026. What's very interesting to me, Sean, is when you go into 2027, is not so much the non-OECD countries driving the incremental demand, it's actually Australia and New Zealand. So very much OECD countries, and again, they have gas infrastructure in place, but of course, they haven't been successful in incentivizing enough domestic supply to fulfill their gas demands. And so, both those countries will actually be starting to import LNG in the Asia Pacific region in 2027.
What about regulatory complexities and permitting timelines across Asia? How accommodating are they? Are they improving for investment decisions in 2026?
Yes, one of the challenges on the regulatory side is really around domestic gas prices and domestic gas price allocation, particularly for an archipelago nation like Indonesia, which does make it tricky for them to incentivize their domestic supplies to fulfill their demand. So again, it really encourages them to boost LNG imports, as you allude to, also permitting problems with building onshore facilities, which is why these floating import infrastructures, the FSRUs, have really taken off. We spoke about Bangladesh, Pakistan, Philippines as well, but also those two new importers in 2027, Australia and New Zealand. They will very much both be using floating infrastructure. A, it's easier to permit. B, it's less carbon intensive. And if in the fullness of time these countries do manage to boost their domestic production, that floating infrastructure can, of course, sail away to somewhere else, and it won't just be a complete sunk cost. So yes, as the answer to your
Marc,
question.
just to get your other views again, any other predictions you have for 2026 on LNG on the wider frame, whether it be in Europe or Europe versus Asia, pulling the marginal tankers?
Well, we've spoken a lot on the demand side, Sean. If we also look on the supply side, it was the second strongest ever year last year for final investment decisions. We had 70 million tons of capacity that was sanctioned in 2025 globally for LNG. We very much expect that momentum to spill over into 2026, and there is around 60 million tons that could be sanctioned. Some of it, again, will be in the United States, but a lot of it is now shifting to Asia to be closer to the buyers, in particular projects in Papua New Guinea, but also elsewhere in the Pacific, Western Canada, and then also in the Indian Ocean.
Sorry, when you say 60 or 70 billion, that's dollars?
Sorry, that's 60 to 70 million tons per annum of new LNG capacity reaching final
infrastructure. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And that's receiving infrastructure in Asia?
That's actually exporting infrastructure.
Exporting
globally.
Infrastructure. Okay. And you say 70 last year, you would expect 60 this year.
Correct.
Remain flat, rise up to 5% is the survey result here in total Asian LNG demand, and then near $11 or less on pricing. Yuri, I wanted just to close out with your thoughts on emission scrutiny. You know, obviously that's a big issue growing. How are LNG developers, operators? Is that one of the factors in Japan? I know you listed a few, but scrutiny, emission scrutiny, an issue for the future outlook for LNG in Japan?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Japan is launching a mandatory ETS, so emissions trading system, to large emitters from this year. So this is very much on the forefront of their mind. But of course, I think that rather so much as a domestic pressure, it is a global international pressure. And this is why Japan sort of started a couple of years ago, the so-called Clean Initiative, which South Korea joined. And actually, I think in the last 12 months, a lot more companies around the world have joined this initiative. So You know, I think that maybe the results are still not quite as loud as maybe the industry would like, but certainly there has been some progress and definitely something that Japan is very keen to show that it's making progress on.
Ashore, last word to you. One of the things that made the big headlines globally last year was the oil storage capacity in Japan, in China, surprising everybody, the scale at which China built up oil storage inventories up above 1 billion barrels in total. Where is China's priority focus on gas storage capacity and the idea that one would be importing gas for storage or building greater storage capacity in the future?
Yes, China's receiving capacity has increased year on year, and in 2026, even to 2030, China's receiving capacity will continuously increase because there's still some structure will be restructured because now China has almost 34 or 36 receiving terminal, and in the future there will be more. So
36 receiving,
will.
sorry, just to be clear, China has 36 receiving LNG terminals.
Yes, but
Yes.
they just oh no 34. Now it's 34, yes. 34 receiving capacity.
Okay, 34
34 receiving terminals.
terminals. Right. Okay.
Yes.
And you expect those to increase in 2026? There will be more this year added?
Yes. And even in 2030.
How many more do you expect?
We expect it will to increase double. And also the
Whoa. You expect the receiving terminals of LNG in China, which is currently 24,
yes.
You expect them to double?
To double in 2030, not 26, not 20.
Wow. You expect that China's importing terminals for LNG, which are currently 24, will double to 48 by 2030 in the next 5 years?
Yes.
Jesus. Wow.
And not 24, it's 34.
It's 34.
Yes, 34 and double in 2030. Yes.
Wow. So it's 34, double 34 is 68 terminals in the next 5 years. My goodness. That's a big number to end with. Marc, you're going to be busy. You're going to be busy out there. Listen, we have to wrap it up here in Asia. It's been an amazing 3 hours. It's always so refreshing going through Asia because it's always about tomorrow and more, and just that last data point there from 34 to 68 incoming terminals. I mean, nowhere on the planet are you going to get data points like that. And so, although there's some amazing data points on the other side of the delivery in Qatar these days, of the scale of increases that they're implementing. But we have to wrap it up there. It's been wonderful to have you guys at the table today. Yuri, Humber in Japan, Marc, Howson in Singapore, and Ashore in China. Really great to have your insights and participating and wrapping up the Asia section. We'll take a half-hour coffee break and come back at 11 a.m. Dubai time to take us through 3 hours of Middle East sessions, which will obviously be on the oil supply and gas supply out of this region, the dominating subject, of course. Oil and gas demand being the big part of the Asian section, and now we turn it around and go to the center of supply being the Middle East. Thank you, guys. Have a great day. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.